I'm delighted to be joined by Marinella Soldi, who's the current chair of Italy's public broadcaster, RAI. She's also the protagonist of a hugely popular case study at INSEAD on digital transformation. Thanks for joining us, Marinella. Now, I want to take you back to the case. The case is unusual because it's set in 2010, which was really right at the very beginning of the digital revolution, and you were the pioneer in many senses of this move to digital. How did you spot that trend, and how did you know to move?
So in 2010, the internet, of course, was very present in our lives, but specifically from a TV perspective. The business that I was leading in Southern Europe, Discovery, was essentially a B2B business. So we sold the channels to platforms such as Sky, and they then rebroadcasted it. And the big shift that we identified really was the potential to move to a B2C model. So DTT as a platform, you would have Freeview in the UK, and it exists in every single country in Europe pretty much, was allowing the multiplication of channels that consumers could access directly without going through a pay platform. This was basically the biggest news in Italy at the time. So what did this mean? This basically meant that it opened a new option to access, for access of our content. And it basically also meant a complete change in mentality, both in terms of the people who were making the content, but also in terms of the overall business that would have gone from sort of some fairly regular B2B revenues to more uncertain advertising revenues, but that had greater potential. Why us and not others? It was a trend that was available to everybody. You know, of course you had to bet that it would actually grow as a platform, DTT. You never know that. Nobody has a crystal ball, and trends would be going, you know, here and there. But at the end of the day, I think for Discovery, it was a question of seeing how much potential there was to watch content by customers that had never seen it, because the platforms of pay were so limited in the market.
And I remember when we wrote the case study together and I was talking to members of your team back then, one of the things that fascinated me is, although the conversation was all around the digital transformation and how the strategy changed, almost all of them led with the change in culture that you started to invoke in the team. Can you tell me a little bit about how you see those two things going together?
So in fact, you know, when I arrived, the notion of moving to digital terrestrial TV, so DTT, was already in the team. They already had presentations or, you know, sort of top-line business cases. So the ideas were there. And I think, you know, that there's this notion sometimes that leaders come in with this brilliant idea and then everybody follows. Well, this wasn't absolutely the case there, nor do I think it exists in general. It's about actually identifying those ideas and those team members that have that vision based on data, and listening to them and then giving them the power and the empowerment to make it grow. So with regards to what you're saying, I think today, especially, we talk so much about company needing to, you know, make digital transformations, and therefore it's the job of the CTO to do that. I think that's wildly wrong. You know, if you change technology in a company, you will be 30% of the way there. You have to change how people work, and therefore what their mindset is, and, you know, how they own a different looking business going forward. So with regards to your question, I just think it's not an either or. And the two things absolutely have to go together. If you don't change the culture or adopt a culture or a mindset of, you know, risk taking, of owning a different vision of the business, of looking at the data in a different way, of, you know, then whatever you want to do from a strategic perspective may not work. So it's not about one or the other, it's the two ingredients together.
And one of the backstories to your case, which is so fascinating, is that you came into this role from a very different place. You know, you'd done an MBA at INSEAD, you'd had a very successful career in corporate, in the media industry, but then you'd had a period, quite a lengthy period, where you'd shifted track and become a coach. And then it's from that coaching role, that really independent role, you'd come in. So that's one point of difference. Also, if we think about the Italian media industry at that time, it was very male dominated, very Italian. Obviously, you're a woman, you're also dual national, British, Italian. So in many ways, you were very different coming in. What role did that play, do you think, in both your appointment, but also your ability to push things through and to look at things in a different way?
Yeah, I think those are very important. At the end of the day, all of those are fundamental elements that make up my experience, which I was able to bring to the table. I think it's very interesting. In the appointment to the discovery role, I really found, I didn't know at the time, but I found the sort of the synthesis of my experiences, as you said, MBA, but also McKinsey. So a lot, very problem solving, very strategic, very sort of that kind of part of my brain had been trained, if you like. And I loved it, by the way. But in my experiences up until the discovery moment, or actually up until the moment that I decided to train as a coach, was always this notion that very rarely, or not often, do companies not know about where they should go or where they should try. So the strategic element is, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's kind of, you can get very smart people to tell you what to do. The real difficulty is making it happen. The real difficulty is winning the hearts and minds, appointing the right people at the right place, promoting the ones that are good, maybe letting go of the ones that, that whole human aspect of the living, breathing company, organization. That's where I'd seen companies fail. And so that was the reason why I decided to become a coach, because I was so interested in the how. How do you make that happen? So on that's, with regards to the first point that you made, and the second, of course, I mean, as I was when I was 8 years old, I was a different person. I was a person who was in an English-speaking classroom without speaking the language, and so I had the skills to be different and to thrive in a different place, and I think that was probably part of the connection that I was able to bring to discovery, because I was speaking a language that was understood in the States, which is where the key stakeholders were, but I obviously would also very able to know and be part of the local context in Italy.
And so for you, in some way, you had a built-in advantage. You've always been in that role of difference from quite a small child up until now, really. If you think about some of the people you mentor and lots of people who go into roles being very visibly different, but maybe who don't have the privilege of your background where they've battled with that as a young child and learned how to overcome it, what do you think for them they can learn from your story about leading while being different?
I think nowadays, especially, difference it can be more appreciated as a value. Let's put it this way. So the way the world is moving from a corporate perspective, all the focus on sustainability, the ESGs, I think helps to some extent. Now, whether that can actually become concrete and companies actually be appreciated, not just for the financial results, but all of the impact we'll see. So that's a sort of macro picture, which was different, I think, to 10, 20, 30 years ago. Being different, you, as a leader, I think you have to make sure that you build connections at all levels, not many, but the most important ones. Because otherwise you will be a very interesting, different leader that nobody listens to. And in order to be as effective leader, you have to have people that listen to you. So it's about finding the connections in the key people that are more open, whether it's to change or to your style or to, and there always will exist. So don't push on the ones that are hard to shift, but identify the ones that have the same vision of you, even though you might be different, and that difference, so, and value it. But of course, then you have to be very aware, I think, and dipstick measure if the environment is going to listen,
and be willing to take you in.
Absolutely. You can only go so far.
So I was fascinated by what you were saying earlier in terms of the focusing on the inclusion and the empowerment of your team was the thing that really led to the innovation. And yet when we look at most organizations, they split those things, right? This group's in charge of innovation and strategy, this group's in charge of culture. How do you hold those two things together as a leader?
I think it's, again, not either or. And of course, everyone has to have their own specific skill set. But one of the reasons why Discovery was successful and is what I would call contamination, right? So if you have very smart people, even though they're specifics, they're experts in one area, they will be interested in how their part contributes to the whole. So as an example, in Discovery, for example, the sales team, we would ask the sales team to go and look at and attend focus groups of people, consumers talking about content. And the content team would go on sales pitches. So this contamination, which seems obvious, supports any kind of cultural change because you automatically develop the ability to see the business from another perspective. And as a leader, I think again, as a leader, my perspective as a leader, there is no absolute, is having the courage, if you like, to mix things together and to give equal importance to things. So culture change can sometimes be very ephemeral. No? Yeah. It can be something that it takes a long time, for example, that is hard to measure. Whereas the hard stuff, the strategy stuff, the numbers stuff is a little easier. So part, I think, of the change is about looking at the KPIs in a different way and educating the people who also evaluate you in your business. I guess it's also something about how interested you are. If you see people as a cost or if you see people as an investment. And
picking up on that, so one of the key skills you have is coaching. Obviously, you spent many years as a coach. And of course, what we see at INSEAD and other business schools is a trend of people either coming to us for coaching themselves or occasionally reaching a point in their careers where they transition out and become a coach. I'm really interested in your transition, which is quite unusual, which is bringing those coaching skills back into a senior leadership role. Talk a little bit about what you see as the value of having those coaching skills as a leader.
The value, of course, is that in order to have become an executive coach of standing or of quality, if you like, you will have done a lot of work on yourself in terms of self-awareness. And so when you show up back into a management role, you are, if you like, more aware of where your blind spots are, of where your preferences are, which again, I think enables you to lead and manage in a much more fluid way. You also understand more, have understood the research around the importance of culture, the importance of the people side in order to create excellent organizations, in order to make things happen, in order to get results. So it's not, you create the link in your mind between results and how you lead. And I think that's a very important thing. But I do want to say that coming from a coaching background also has disadvantages. So, for example, the mistakes I made in Discovery were usually linked to the fact that I was the eternal optimist about people. And I would always go and play to potential. And therefore, I failed to see that some people, not only would they not change, but they may have well rode against, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So every sort of style has its downside. I think you just need to be aware of it.
So if we think in today's business world, many, many leaders are engaged in this drive to innovation, to digital transformation, to disruption. From your experience, if you were to give them some advice as to sort of how just practically they can get that through in a decent way that brings the people along, what are the few things you would say to them?
I think the number one thing is you never be afraid of over-communicating. I think communicating your vision, communicating the strategy, communicating where you're going, creating that engagement, opening up that empowerment. So all of these buzzwords that it's at the end of the day mean that you as a leader are open to understanding where the team thinks the business should be going on or going, And again, that's not everybody's comfortable with that. The old command and control style of leadership is alive and kicking in many organizations. So again, I think that's a very important aspect, communicating, thinking about innovation and digital disruption, I think, as we've already said, not just as a technological challenge, but as a cultural challenge, which requires people training, people understanding themselves and how they can work in a different way, not just in a different mindset, but with different processes. And frankly, the COVID situation, although tragic, has also pushed people to believe that they can do, and companies to sustain things that they didn't think that they could do. So the whole smart working element, which again has forced upon us, to deliver results working in a way that's different. Now, whatever happens in terms of the future and whether offices will, stay open again or close, or whatever it's going to be, I think it's showed companies, leaders, and employees that they can probably do more than they think they can in a different way. And I think that sort of builds a little bit of resilience and courage.
Yeah. Thank you.